But if you were talking to someone that was going to vote Democrat, where would you kind of start that conversation with both of them? So, Frank, we'll start with you, and then Bobby, maybe we'll get your insight into that question as well.
Yeah, I would say look at the platforms. Look at both party platforms. Because let's be honest, in the United States of America, at this point, it's either going to be a Republican or a Democrat that's going to be president. There's not going to be some third party at this point, okay? So you've got two choices. In this election, it's going to be Trump or Biden. That's it, okay? I wish we had different choices, but we don't. So what you're going to have to now do is you're going to have to look at the platforms. You got Trump's record, you got Biden's record. Biden's been in Washington a lot, even longer than Trump, and you can see where they stand and where they're heading. And personally, for me, when I look at the Democratic platform, I'm horrified. Just being honest with you. I mean, it is the most anti-biblical platform than it's ever been. Not to say the Republicans are a walk in the park, but in this case, it seems to me the Republicans are the least worst choice, okay? We got two pretty bad choices, but the Republicans especially are the least worst choice, and that's typically what happens in an election. In fact, Dr. Norman Geisler, our mutual friend who passed away last year, Bobby, used to have a saying, and this was before the 2016 election. He said, just about every election is a choice between a known witch and a suspected devil.
Mm.
It was like Dr. G. Correct in 2016, if you know what I mean. But he said that long before 2016. You just have to look at the platforms and see where people are going to go. And as I said before, it's not our salvation, but politics is important because politics affects our ability to preach and live the gospel, as we talked about earlier. And that is very important. And it seems to me the Democratic platform is going to take away a lot of religious freedom. And I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about their stance on life, obviously. I'm concerned about their stance on so many issues. Marxism is another issue. Identity politics is another issue. We shouldn't be dividing people by these ethnicities. As I mentioned earlier, there's one race, the human race. Yeah. And we ought to be just saying everybody's made in the image of God, and we ought to treat everybody that way, regardless of what you think politically.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, Bobby, let me say one thing. I see people talk. Why are we talking about politics? We just explained why we're talking about politics. Because it affects.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
To even have this conversation right now. You can't have this conversation in China. You can't have this conversation in North Korea. You can't preach the gospel in these places. Wake up, people. Sorry.
No, I think that, listen, my heart, as I mentioned, as a pastor, was always to just, I didn't mention parties because I just wanted everybody to be as welcome as possible because I knew that the big dividing issue is going to be the gospel. And that's the stumbling block. I will say that as I think about where we are today, statements like, why are we talking about politics? Why are we talking about politics? Well, it doesn't take a genius right now for us to look at the news and realize how much we are being politically affected right now as a culture. Like, do I think COVID-19 is a real issue? Yeah, I think it's a real issue. But do I think it's being politicized? Absolutely. I think it's really being politicized. So I think it is real, but I think it's being politicized. And so when I think of both sides, I think that, hey, there is no perfect candidate. That's for sure. William Lane Craig recently, I heard him talking about how when it comes to a particular candidate, hey, it would be great if the person had the character that you wanted, but what you're voting for is their policies. What policies are they promising to uphold? And the policies that I see that Biden would uphold is going to be a complete overturning of our country. It's going to be reinforcing LGBTQ. It's going to be reinforcing critical race theory. It's going to be, it's going to be on a Marxist track. It's going to be pro-death with abortion. And so when I think about the Bible, then it doesn't take much for us to stop and look and go, look, I might not like this particular candidate either, but which person is going to enforce policies that are going to help preserve culture the best that would look most like the Bible? Now, I get it. We as a church have the biggest role to play, and we need to step up. We need to get involved. We need to get engaged. But that doesn't mean we need to be passive as it relates to politics. I think at times in the past, I was probably more passive than I should have been. And this is coming from a guy who served as a lead pastor. And it was because I think that many pastors will stay. It felt appropriate at the time, but ever since, there's been so much decline in the last several years, Frank, that it doesn't feel quite as appropriate. There was a time where the left and the right, I mean, they were different, obviously, but it wasn't as overwhelming. Now it's becoming so overwhelming that I think pastors who are being passive, they won't be being passive when we look like a country that has been completely silenced. But then I fear it'll be too late, and that's why I'm speaking up.